Shashank,
Yeah.
what the heck, man? I feel like we are closer to AGI than ever before. Like it's wild. Like Grok 3 gets announced, and
That's big.
yeah, it's one of the biggest computers like of all time, best model. Then Microsoft is going out there making like new forms of matter, like ridiculous.
That's a little insane. Yeah.
Like absolutely insane. And then we get all these
That's
companies.
for their quantum computing chip.
Yeah, they have this like new quantum computing chip that's going to be able to scale to 1 million qubits.
Potentially.
Absolutely insane. And then finally, we have all of these other companies that are working on humanoid robots.
Yeah.
There's so many, and they're actually really, really good. Just figure
About as good as someone who's stoned trying to, move things in the real world. Yeah.
But it feels like we are approaching AGI from all these different use cases, right? Like we're scaling the LLMs, we're coming up with new ways of doing simulation through quantum computers, and then we're bringing all of that into the real world.
That's true. I do love that there's innovation in every different field from all sorts of different angles. So I think even if one approach doesn't work, we have so many different bets going on that, it's gonna be an interesting next 5-10 years.
Oh my gosh, not even the next 5-10 years. It's like the now, like Tuesday is going to be freaking interesting.
It is. All right, let's talk about Grok 3. I think that's the most tangible out of any of these products that most people can use. As of Thursday, as of a few days ago, I think they announced it early last week, and then they rolled it out to literally everyone. It's free. It's available right now. It's the best model online. I think Mark did a vibe check, and I think he can definitively say that for his use case, it's fantastic. It's topping all the benchmarks. The chatbot arena, which is also like a vibe check of, which LLM flavor do people like? And it seems like people have significantly preferred Grok 3 over all other models.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I've been using Claude 3.5, Anthropic's model, for most of my programming tasks. And I mean, that model is amazing, right?
Amazing for programming, yeah.
I think not even just programming, but lots of things. Any task I throw at it, it seems to do really well. But Grok is just, I can't really articulate why. It just feels a little bit better. And Shashank and I were kind of discussing this before, and it's hard to say exactly why. I think there could be a bunch of reasons why it might be better.
There's lots of reasons. It's also the newest big state-of-the-art model that's been released. So, I'm sure OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, maybe even Mistral has better models in the pipeline that they're working on. It's just maybe they haven't released it yet.
Yes, I mean, I think one reason that it's probably a little bit better is it was just maybe trained on more compute and more data.
A lot more compute. They've been throwing around some numbers. It apparently packs 10x the computing power of Grok 2, whatever that means.
Because like it seems like they used, and it's hard to actually tell if they used 100,000 GPUs or 200,000 GPUs for this, because they've been throwing out both numbers. But regardless, like I think it was 100,000 A100 or H100 GPUs.
Yeah, as with most Elon companies, the pace at which they've been moving is ridiculous. Like it's unheard of in this industry. I think they were trying to contract this out to maybe Oracle or something, where they were like, okay, fine, we're trying to build this new data center. It's going to take us, however weeks, months. And Elon's like, no, that's way too slow. I'm just going to buy this old, what was it, textile factory?
Yeah, it was the something electric company. It's
Some old defunct factory. And he's like, let's use this, build a data center in there, get some energy. I think he's buying gas power plants, and those take some time to get up and running. So he's just got generators, diesel generators, I think, outside the data center, powering all the compute for the training, the inference, everything, and like whipped it up in, 122 days. Massive data center.
Yeah, so it looks like it was an Electrolux factory in Memphis, because I suppose that there used to be the Electrolux. Because what is Electrolux? They make like washers and dryers, I
That
think.
sounds
Something
about
like
right.
that. It looks like they're a Swedish multinational home appliance company. So they have like vacuums, laundry, kitchen, all this stuff. And I mean, it's too bad that the Electrolux factory used to be there, right? And now it's gone. But
That's a very apt metaphor for, old technologies being replaced by the new.
yeah, but I mean, we still need washers and dryers, right? So it's too bad that that left,
Memphis.
Memphis, and I mean, maybe even the United States it left, which is kind of too bad. But
I mean, what is the refresh cycle for washers and dryers? I think my parents have probably had the one at my place back home for 20 years,
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, well, I guess it's out with the old and in with the new.
as opposed to factories for manufacturing chips, for phones, laptops, with the refresh cycles being a couple years, maybe like 1 to 3 years.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, I don't replace my appliances very often, right? I mean, and often you would try
You
to
did
fix.
get a new laptop though.
I did just get a new laptop, yeah. And I got a new camera. As we can see here, Shashank bought some new lights. But yeah, as for actual like appliances, I don't know. I almost never replace it.
Refresh cycle is very slow. As opposed to LLMs, I think we've been switching LLMs every few weeks because the new one's just so much better.
That's true. That's true.
So what makes this one so much better?
So it feels like it really will try hard and answer the question that I give it, right? So, I was trying a couple different things. So I was giving this one programming task. So I've been trying to get into a little bit of stock trading, and I wanted to simulate some of my strategies. So I had it write some options programs for me, and actually had it do the back testing. So I originally tried to have Anthropic 3.5 uh, do that, and it worked okay, but the program just wouldn't like completely run properly, and it had a lot of really subtle errors. And then I took that and I put that into Grok 3 with the thinking enabled, and it got it perfectly. The code, I think, compiled first try. It was, I don't know, it felt a little bit better. I I don't know why that is. Part of me wonders if it is due to the fact that they have a lot less guardrails in place than Anthropic.
Yeah, I was we were talking a little bit earlier before this podcast, and I think this has been proven by researchers. I forget if it was like some Stanford paper where they showed that the more RLHF, the more fine-tuning, supervised fine-tuning.
Oh, so by the way, RLHF is reinforcement learning with human feedback.
Yeah, so that's where you train the model a little bit more with, your specific use case, to give it examples of how you want it to respond to specific answers. Maybe put in some safety, blocks in there, so it's not going to say anything profane, racist, or, politically insensitive. But, Elon is not a fan of filtering. He just wants everything out in the open. And that's how they trained Grok 3. They didn't put any filters in. And I think that does result in an improved performance. It's gonna give you the answer to literally everything. Which, in terms of safety, I don't know how good that is for the world. You can ask it any kind of illicit thing, any kind of dangerous thing, and it'll give you the answer. And whereas I think on the flip side, on the complete extreme end, there might be models out there that might refuse an answer just because you said the word, I don't know, fire or something. You're like, oh, the sandwich is fire, and that model is like, sorry, I can't respond to that because you're using volatile speak or something. So that would be the other extreme, and Grok is here on the very opposite end.
Yeah, and I think that you don't necessarily want these models showing you how to make napalm, or you don't want to show how to make an atomic bomb because that could destroy society. But at the same time, there's a lot of, I guess, false positives or false negatives, right? Where they think somebody's trying to do something illicit, but they're not. So we have a mutual friend, Russell, who was trying to get one of these LLMs to help him write some program for his. So for background, he is a security researcher. So he does things. He works at these companies trying to help maintain their security, and he was asking for some help with some of his pen testing work, and it said, "Oh,
Pen testing is penetration testing when
yeah,
you try to attack some system.
exactly. Yeah. So he used to work for like a water company. And so you don't necessarily you want to make sure that the water is very safe. You don't want people going in and dumping in just a bunch of poison and poisoning the water supply.
Not ideal.
Yeah. So, he was there trying to help protect their cybersecurity. And he was doing some pen testing to try to make sure that their network was secure. And then he was trying to use the LLM to help with that. So he said, like, "Hey, can you help me do this?" And the LLM said, "No, I cannot do that. Like, I don't want to support in writing any viruses." And then he said, "Oh no, but it's for my pen testing work for security." And it's like, "Oh, okay, let me help you with that." So I don't know. Like, at the one hand, I'm like, I don't want people using the LLM to write computer viruses, but at the other hand, like, I want the security researchers to be able to make it so they have the best and most secure software programs. And I think that in my mind, you can't really make it so that you I think I would rather have the models be a little bit more permissible, than block things, right? Because I think that, um, it's not a good thing for these big tech companies to say, what is good speech or not. What can you Google? What can't you Google? What can you ask the LLM? What can you not ask LLM? I think that, we have law enforcement, and we have governments that should, you know, set laws that say what you can and can't do. And if it's not illegal to know this information, I think it should be allowed.
I mean, I feel like that's a tough ideological question. It's like, are these LLMs just as powerful and potentially dangerous as, a gun, for example? So the US has a lot of laws and restrictions about who can own weapons and purchase these things, and there's training to purchase and own these weapons. So I feel like these LLMs, maybe not right now, but they're trending in the same direction, that they're going to be so powerful, so capable of doing both good and also harm. So I feel like if it's not the responsibility of the makers of these LLMs, then how will the government or law enforcement be able to prevent people from doing harm with these models? Because like anyone can just download some of these models. Maybe not Grok because it's still closed source, but the Chinese DeepSeek R1 reasoning models that came out, which are completely open source, open weights, you can download the whole thing and run it. That, is a tricky situation.
Yes, I agree, but I think a lot of those laws are already in place, right?
Mm.
So I could write my manifesto with a pencil and piece of paper. I could even grab a rock on the side of on the ground and then carve my manifesto into the sidewalk. I could carve it into a wall, right? Writing, I mean, there's power in speech, there's power in the pen. I can even talk to somebody and then use a megaphone to, show how to make an atomic bomb if I really wanted to. Now, I think that maybe should be banned because that could directly incite violence, right? Um, and for example, you can't write you can't say, "Oh, fire in a crowded theater," right? That you can't do, right?
Definitely don't yell bomb at a plane.
Right, exactly. That should be illegal, right? Because you're inciting panic, you're inciting potentially violence. But I don't think they should be banning pencils, and they shouldn't be banning you from, speaking your mind and things, right? So I think that, in my mind, just you should ban the actions that you don't want, but you shouldn't necessarily ban the information.
Well, that's a tough one. Not to dwell on this too much, but one counterexample is like a book on bomb making. Would you allow Amazon to carry and sell a book on bomb making? Because, you know, it's just information. It's not actually a bomb. It's not going to explode.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that
So the LLM, I feel like, is kind of an equivalent of a book on bomb making and all the other violent, potentially dangerous things that you can think of.
I mean, sure, maybe you wouldn't want a book on bomb making, but I think at the same time, right? Like we don't ban books on chemistry and we don't ban books on physics. Even though if after I finished my chemistry and physics book, I might be able to make a bomb, right? Because I would know enough. So I think that it's a really fine line, and I think I would rather have allowed the books on bomb making get through than be banning too many things and then just, you know, not allowing any of this information to flow freely throughout the world. Because I think that the world will be worse if we banned all physics, chemistry, and books, which, you know, could hypothetically be made to make bombs.
I'm completely with you there. So just to briefly touch on some of these guardrail techniques that these companies use, and specifically the DeepSeek R1 model. Since it's Chinese, obviously China is a very restricted country, restricted political situation, and they don't want you saying anything about Tiananmen Square, anything against the government, anything against their president, Xi Jinping. So if you ask it about Tiananmen Square, it just would refuse to respond. But you can like trick it, like you were talking about how our friend Russell was, you know, trying to get the LLM to give him information about pen testing. You can trick the Chinese models to tell you about Tiananmen Square if you just ask it to replace all the E's with 3's and have it speak in like leet speak. So the model is kind of confused. It doesn't have the guardrails to prevent leet speak version of the same event. So that will kind of get through. So it's kind of like a cat and mouse game where we've seen this in traditional cybersecurity, where hackers will keep trying new techniques to bring some system down, and the white hat hackers or like the companies trying to provide the service will try to put in new blocks against these new attacks. So this is going to be a constant cat and mouse game for those companies putting these guardrails. And I think there's always going to be hackers or people trying to trick the model into giving you the information that you don't want it to give.
Yeah, and I guess that over time, the models will get better and better at not getting tricked, because eventually they'll be smarter than us. So, but I don't know. It's a really slippery slope, I think. And I would I would rather lean on the government to set rules around this as opposed to having the companies just try to ban everything.
I guess Elon's in a very unique position where he can both influence the government, being right next to our President Trump, and also leading the world's best AI model as of today. And he's in a very unique position where he can do both. And coming back to Grok and its performance, it seems like it is by far the best model on literally every benchmark that I can find. I don't think I've found a benchmark that's publicized that it's not as good as any of the other state-of-the-art models. So just to kind of like clarify a little bit, Grok 3 is the newest version of XAI, Elon's AI company. And there's two versions. There's the regular Grok 3, similar to ChatGPT, and then they have the reasoning Grok 3, which is, you know, better than all the other reasoning models. The regular vanilla Grok 3 is better than all the other, I don't know what to call it, like single shot models that don't do reasoning, but just give you an answer right out of the box. And it's like pretty astonishing. What?
Yeah, so I think that, and I tried to pull up some of the information about it. I think a couple things about the Grok 3 benchmark. So one, I would say it's definitely a very capable model. It definitely passes all my vibe checks as being, you know, one of the best models for my particular use cases. But with that being said, um, in some of their benchmarks, they are showing both the current capability and then a beta version, which is not yet released.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm trying to find the screenshot of that, but in their original presentation, they had two lines where they had a darker, thicker blue line, and then like imagine a bar graph, and then kind of on top of the bar graph, they would have a lighter blue box where they said, okay, this is our beta result. So in our beta unreleased model, it crushes the benchmarks, but in the current released model, it's not actually winning in the benchmarks. And also, I heard that Grok was not actually releasing all of the benchmarks that they were losing on. So I think that, yeah, they are showing like only where they're winning, but where they're not winning, I think they weren't even releasing those benchmarks. So not to say it's not a good model. I think it's one of the best models out there, but to say it's winning all the benchmarks, I think is not accurate.
That's fair. So it's like a self-selected, curated list of benchmarks to make Grok 3 look very good. And, benchmarks can be tricky. I was listening to a podcast with the researchers from Gemini, and they talked about how they didn't fixate too much on the benchmark themselves because that doesn't always translate to a better model overall. It is kind of a useful tool to push the researchers to build a better model because you have this one number goes up, model better, and it's very easy to gamify that approach. And it also gives you a lot of clout in the public perception because Grok 3 shows you a bunch of benchmarks that it's beating all the other models, and you're like, okay, this is obviously better than this other model at this specific use case, as opposed to vibe checks, which are very subjective and very nuanced and different for each person. It's hard to evaluate models objectively in that sense.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And also, since people know what the benchmarks are, they can potentially train to beat those benchmarks. Now, I'm not saying that that's what they're doing, but I'm not saying that's not what they're doing, right? We don't know.
We don't know.
So the thing is, if you train on, let's say, the entire internet or the entire internet plus Twitter, and you happen to throw some of the benchmark training data in there, some of these benchmark example questions, I mean, you might just do really good on that benchmark just because you're overfitting to that benchmark. So I don't know. I'm not saying that's what they're doing, but they might be. But even if they were, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, right? Because I think that just because you're like happen to have the benchmark data on there, like if, for example, I was overfitting on certain tasks that are useful, let's say I was overfitting the LLM on programming tasks, and then you happen to have a benchmark that measures programming tasks, well then, I don't know, that's not the end of the world that you just over like trained on being really good at one particular thing. And then because you're really good at that particular thing, you happen to do well in the benchmark. So I think that if the benchmarks are well designed, overfitting towards the benchmark is kind of okay.
And also, if you overfit on a benchmark that is one of the popular use cases for these LLMs, I think it makes sense. And we can talk about this in one of our later episodes, but what was it? The Anthropic's economic index showed how programming is one of the most popular use cases for LLMs by like a wide margin. And they've tried to optimize for the live code benchmark, and it beats Claude, which was the previous king of the hill for coding. And so I don't think it's a bad idea to focus on the benchmarks that are the popular use cases right now for LLMs.
Yeah, so I didn't want to talk about the Anthropic Economic Index, but since you brought it up, just really quickly, on February 10th, so today is February 23rd, so about 2 weeks ago, Anthropic came out with this economic index. So basically what it is it showed what use cases people were using for their particular model, right? So they showed that 37.2% of all queries for people using the Anthropic's models were for computer and math related things. So,
which is surprising because I would imagine it's like customer service, creative writing, helping them draft emails, that coding.
I mean, yeah. So I think that coding is something that these LLMs are really good at because one, there's a ton of training data,
A lot of data,
lots of data,
open source too.
lots of open source data. Like you can train on GitHub. For those who don't know, GitHub is a place where programmers used to store code, and they will put their programs on there, and a lot of that will be actually open source, so anybody can actually view the code. And when you are training on uh, computer code, the computer code almost by definition is something that computers can understand really well. And you can also use it to validate. So you can run the program and make sure it runs as you expect, right? But for other things, it's a little bit harder to get concrete evaluations on that, right? So I think that lends math and science type things to do really well with these AI techniques, right? So I think that is one reason why we have 37.2% of all of the LLM queries going to computers and mathematical type things. So
Yeah, that brings to mind the concept of like improving performance in the verifiable domains. I think that's the right word, where, like you mentioned, programming, math, science, they usually have a right or wrong answer. You can get to that answer maybe a couple different ways, but at least you can like verify whether or not it's correct. As opposed to creative writing, for example, give me a short story about a couple different characters with this theme. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong, and each verifier, each person evaluating the answer will have a different, opinion about what they prefer. So it's kind of harder to train these LLMs with automatically generated data, um, and have it improve itself because you don't know what is the right answer. You don't know what to optimize for, as opposed to, like coding. You write a program, you run it. If it runs, great. If it doesn't run, then okay, go back to the drawing board.
right. And just having code that runs is not necessarily sufficient.
That's fair.
Right? Because maybe the code compiles and it runs, but maybe it doesn't look the way you want. It doesn't completely act the way that you hope that it works, right? So maybe, for example, I want the website to have a blue background, but then it makes it with a red background. It's like, well, it technically runs, but it's not exactly what you wanted, right? Because if I'm McDonald's, maybe I want my color scheme to be like red and gold, right? Or red and yellow, right? For the McDonald's colors. But if it does it with blue and black, right? Then it's not quite exactly what I wanted. So even though it's technically correct, it may not be what you want, right? So
Not to mention on the engineering side, like the design guidelines, best practices of engineering, algorithms, you want those things to be followed as well. You want maintainable code. You want something that is able to scale to a big, massive product, last a long time. I mean, it's kind of like how the DJI mic. This is a transparent one, and you can see the innards. They're so beautiful. They're so like cleanly organized, neat and tidy, and seemingly following best practices of electrical engineering. Although I have no idea, but it looks pretty at least.
it looks nice. I mean, for all we know, this is a sticker with a circuit button on it.
I don't think so, but that's entirely possible.
I have no idea, but I mean, they're nice. They're nice microphones. Anyways, just to kind of complete the economic index from Anthropic, they said that 10.3% were used for arts and media type things. So here they said that that was things for like technical writing, copywriting. So copywriting would be writing words for things like advertisements, right? So if I was gonna, write text for a website to sell, right? Basically, copywriting is writing to sell. Then there said 1.3% for editing, and then it looks like a little bit was also used in like film and TV. So that's 10.3%. Then 9.3% was used for education type things. So this was like tutors, archivists, industrial designers, book publishing, stuff like that. 7.9% was office and administrative. So, but I don't know. When they wrote this, it seems like a lot of this was a lot more math heavy office and administrative work. So they were mentioning that this was for people who were doing things like IT administration, which is kind of, I would almost lump into the computer and mathematical. They also lumped in bioinformatics technicians, so people who are doing research on things like DNA sequences, which you could probably say this is sort of science type thing. Anyways, and then 6.4% was life, physical, and social scientists. So here they said historians, anthropologists, clinical psychologists, and other types of research. And then lastly, only 5.9% of the usage on Anthropics was business and financial. So this was things like financial analysts, credit counselors, security management specialists, and doing things like for analyzing financial data and investment and budgeting strategies. So, with all that being said, it still seems like most of this stuff leans towards the highly technical, right? So,
Specifically software engineering,
y-
computer and mathematical.
yeah, computer, mathematical, science, and it looks like some finance, but it seems like there are people who are definitely not using this, right? So we're we're not using like truck drivers aren't using this.
They aren't using Claude. So a big caveat is this is from Anthropic, which is the parent company that made Claude, which is, a very, very good model. It was probably, the best model before the Grok 3 announcement. But again, it is not OpenAI. It is not Google. I don't know what percentage of the market share they have. I think it is still pretty niche. It is a software engineer. It is the early adopters that are using Claude as opposed to OpenAI or Google, which is a household name. So I think some of this data might also be self-fulfilling and skewed because of the people that are more likely to use Anthropic, as opposed to let's say Llama or Facebook or Meta as a product. They've integrated Llama into WhatsApp, and I think the people using WhatsApp might be like the tail end of all the other job professions that you can think of, like truck drivers or baristas, or my parents, my mom, dad, using these things for like everyday household things. So I think you have to keep that in mind when thinking about this specific report from a niche AI research firm.
That's a very good point. It should be most likely only the enthusiasts who are using it. Yeah, very, very excellent.
I say niche, but it is valued at like $60 billion. So yeah.
Well, I mean, just because it's valued at $60 billion doesn't make it any less niche, right?
Sure.
I think that the reason it's valued so high, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. One, I mean, they need the money, and two, I think that the potential and the promise is very, you know, it's there, right? But just because like there's a lot of potential, there's a lot of promise, and a lot of people are really liking it for their particular use case, doesn't make it any niche. I think if you talk to the average person on the street, they would not even know what the term LLM means or is, right? They'd be like, oh yeah, I heard computers are getting really good and maybe they could help with some stuff, but they wouldn't know about what an LLM is. They're not like us announcing every single latest model, right?
No one cares.
Nobody cares, right? I mean, we care because we are like nerds about this stuff, but I mean, the average person does not even know what an LLM is, and is struggling to set up their iPhone. And here we are just looking at the latest benchmarks of the newest LLMs. It's like, I mean, yeah.
So just looking at market share a little bit, it seems like OpenAI is #1 by a wide margin. Again, I don't know how these metrics are calculated or how they get this data, but trying to average out some of this, a couple different charts for you folks, it seems like OpenAI has the majority by a wide margin. It's like 60, 70, 80% of the market. The next is either Anthropic, Google, or Meta, depending on which benchmark or which market share metric you look at. And they're either 10, 5, 10, or 15%. So OpenAI is still the biggest model by a wide margin. And so I think I would place a strong bet that the usage for the most popular product is kind of different from the niche product that is Claude from Anthropic.
Yeah, I would agree on that. And but who knows? So OpenAI, if you're listening, please release something similar to what Anthropic did. I would love to read it. I think a lot of people are really interested. So yeah, please release your usage. Anyways, yeah. So getting back to Grok, they are now charging for, if you want to use their pro plan, it's now $40 a month. So it used to be $20, but
I know.
yeah.
Again, there's a thing with the Elon company. It's constantly evolving. What you heard or what is advertised on the website a few days ago might not be what it is right now, but still $40 a month. I think it's a steal for the Grok's reasoning capability, because OpenAI, for their latest and greatest reasoning model, they charge like $200 a month. And I think they could, again, because of the market share that we just talked about, they are the leaders, they are a household name. They are the first company that people go to when you think about LLMs. It's kind of like, if you want to search, you Google it. If you want to use an LLM, you chat GPT it. So I think they've been able to charge such like expensive prices with wide margins for a long time, but I don't know if they can sustain that strategy, especially with, open source and completely open models like DeepSeek. And now maybe, Elon is bankrolling this whole thing, maybe subsidizing it to some extent. He can do that right now. I don't know how sustainable that is, but $40 a month, that's pretty affordable.
Yeah, I mean, for what it can do, $40 is an absolute bargain.
I think everyone should be using an LLM, and I think it also is probably worth it for people to pay to use a state-of-the-art LLM with some reasoning capability.
Yeah, I would agree. And I know there's been a lot of hype about DeepSeek, and in the past we've talked about some of these other ways to create reasoning models like S1.
Honestly, those are pretty good too.
They are good, but they're not quite as good, right?
Yeah.
So I think DeepSeek, even though, so for those that have been living under a rock, DeepSeek is one of the Chinese models that came out maybe a month-ish ago, and it has a reasoning model, and it's very good. And there are techniques to turn other models or other LLMs into reasoning models like S1, which we talked about last week. But even though they can be almost as good as some of these top level reasoning models, they're not as good, right? Like DeepSeek is not as good as Grok 3. It's almost as good, but and they use, like, sure, they created DeepSeek for a lot less money, right? I think they say that DeepSeek was created for maybe $6 million plus or minus, who really knows? But it's worse. DeepSeek is worse than Grok, and it's also worse than OpenAI's top model, and DeepSeek is also worse than Anthropic, right? So I think that it's worth it to spend more money if your use case allows for it, right? So if you're doing a lot of programming, you're doing a lot of technical writing, you're doing constant looking up things online. If you're a knowledge worker, you're going to be left behind if you're not using one of these top end LLM models. And if you try to cheap out on using something like DeepSeek and only spend the $2 a month, I think that you're doing yourself a disservice. And spend a little money if you can afford it. I mean, sure, not everybody can afford $20 or even $40 a month, but like, you will grow so much more by having access to one of these models.
And these products are, by definition, products. They've been productized, they've been polished, they've been built to serve enterprise use cases, as opposed to DeepSeek, which is still a very, very, as niche as Anthropic is, DeepSeek is way more niche and very, very like research focused. They're not productized. They can't even handle the capability, like the capacity of users that wanted to use their cheap, affordable model. So I think using a polished product is going to give you a lot more benefits. They're going to keep improving on it. And I think these big dogs are just going to incorporate a lot of the learnings from DeepSeek. given that it's, completely open source model, and they're just going to incorporate that into their next version of the reasoning model, which I think Grok 3 might have done to some extent.
Yeah, for sure. Although I wouldn't say that Grok 3 is perfect in any means. So yesterday I was trying to use it. It was actually down. Yeah, so I went to their website.
Some of the generators might not have been working in their data center.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, so it's definitely like a solid model, and when it runs, I think it's the best. But a lot of these companies are having scaling problems, and the fact that Grok 3 is so new, they probably aren't used to all the traffic. So I think that I'm sure it'll get better, but they are having some issues with being down. Although last time I checked was earlier today, and it was running fine. So it was probably just a little blip. So I wouldn't read too much into that. I'm not saying that Grok is down constantly. It's just the one time I was looking for maybe 20 minutes or so, it was not working.
Yeah, I mean, this is an exciting model. New state-of-the-art research capability. It has like the thinking capability, and they also demoed a big think, which I assume is just more compute for the same task that you ask it. Yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah. So speaking of state-of-the-art technology, did you see what Microsoft has just released?
I saw it. I don't know if I understand it. I don't know if it's something that we can use today, but it seems cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. I definitely don't understand it, but I'm going to do my best to try to explain what I know.
All right.
So Microsoft came out with this new computer, which is a quantum computer, fancy, called the Majorana 1. So if you read it, it's spelled like Majorana. So it's like Majorana, like Majorana, but I guess it's pronounced Majorana. And it's named after this guy called Ettore Majorana, who was this theoretical physicist born in Italy, who did a lot of hardcore quantum work. I don't know. And he theorized this particle, which he named after himself, called the Majorana particle. And he did that in 1937. Although, actually, fun fact, according to his Wikipedia page, soon after theorizing this particle in 1938, he went on a boat and mysteriously disappeared. Now, it's likely he didn't die on that boat, because I don't think the boat actually crashed. Just nobody heard from him again. So he purchased a ticket to travel by ship from Naples to Palermo, which is another, I think, city in southern Italy. And then he was gone. Nobody saw from him again. But some people think that he was still alive in the 1950s. So we have no idea where he is, but maybe he's working at Microsoft.
He's just been stuck in a quantum realm and is not aging, but secretly working on the next big quantum computing chip.
You never know.
All this, he disappeared before he was on his 32nd birthday.
Yeah.
Found a new elementary particle before, it's crazy.
Not just found it, but named it after himself.
Well,
or maybe somebody else named it. I don't know. But he was the person who did all the hardcore research on that. So I guess the Majorana particles have a lot of properties that lend well to quantum computers.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to try to explain all of the intricacies of these particles, but I guess what they help with is, one, they help with scaling, right? So right now, Microsoft claimed to have an 8-qubit quantum computer, but they think that because they were able to make what they call a topological state, or a topological computer, which apparently they say is some sort of new state of matter, that they will be able to scale to 1 million qubits within the next couple of years. Now, what's great is it's not 20 years out in the future as, nuclear fusion is, but they claim that it'll be, within a couple of years. So if a company says like, hey, we can do this within 2 years, I mean, a lot of product life cycles are like couple of years, right? So I was working on the Fire tablets at Amazon, and they would be planning their next product maybe 2 years out into the future, right? So if Microsoft says like, all right, we can do this in 2 or 3 years, that must mean they have like a very tactical plan to release something.
Well, to play devil's advocate, I think not even devil's advocate. I think it's like a very reasonable thing to say that the estimates in cutting edge quantum computing is very different from the predictable trajectory of what is it like a mobile operating system, which is a very mature product, a very mature platform that has been around for what is it, like 20 years at this point, with the earliest iPhone coming out in like 2006 or something. So that is a very predictable, mature field. This is trying to push the forefront of physics. So to kind of set the stage, we're talking about like elementary particles here, which, you know, we are still kind of discovering and uncovering what goes on in atoms, like deep beneath their surface. So you've got this atom, which we thought was like the basic building block for all of reality, all of physics. But then, you know, at some point we broke that down into, okay, we got protons, we got the neutrons, we got electrons. And then we started going even deeper and then broke that down into subatomic particles of like these little wavy things that make up these individual particles. And we call them, you know, quarks or leptons and bosons and fermions. And we started breaking these things even more. And then we started uncovering like, okay, there's like an up quark, there's a down quark based on I think the vibration or the spin which it has, as opposed to
You lost me.
there's so many things. There's so many ways we define these particles and so many properties that these things have, as opposed to an atom with, you know, charge and electrons and protons, positive, negative. Now these things have like spin, they have mass, they have, I'm assuming, waves. Again, neither of us is a physics major, so take this with a grain of salt. But we're breaking down the smallest things known to man, and then finding things even smaller to build this technology.
Okay, so I'm going to try to sum up with what you're saying. You're saying that, okay, an atom,
Yeah.
which we used to think was the smallest thing.
Right.
So I just was looking up, and apparently the name atom came from a Greek guy called Democritus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, around 2,500 years ago. And
It's a while back.
yeah, it's a while. Yeah, 2,500 years ago is a long time. And he was just sitting there thinking about things, and he said, huh, I think that you can cut something. Let's say I cut something in half, and I cut it in half again. At some point, there's probably a point where you can't cut it any smaller.
I mean, not if you're a mathematician and you keep cutting smaller on the real number line. But sorry, continue.
Well, sure. Yeah, like in theory, you could cut smaller indefinitely, but in practice, he said, all right, there's probably a point in the actual physical world that you can't cut something any smaller.
He must have been an experimental physicist, not a theoretical one then.
The opposite. Well, yeah, maybe, who knows? And so he came up with he named that thing from the Greek word atomos, which means the thing that cannot be split.
Yeah.
And so that's where the word atom comes from, because we thought, well, okay, that's like the smallest thing that we could have is the thing that cannot be split. But as you're telling me, there's things that are actually smaller than an atom.
We keep going smaller.
Yeah, that have their own properties, and they have charges and spins, and they can spin left and right and up and down, and they move around, and we don't exactly know where they are. And there's all sorts of interesting properties about these like small building blocks of life, which is really interesting.
And so the whole reason that I even mentioned this is because these things are so small that the things that we use to detect these smaller things have limitations in themselves. Like this video camera that we're using to record this episode for you folks, it uses the light bouncing off of us and projects it onto some little sensor and captures that snapshot of light in time, and does that at 30, 60 frames per second, and then creates a video out of it. But what do you do if these particles don't bounce light off of it? Like, how do you actually see it? So it results in a lot of error in trying to observe these particles and like work with these particles, which is the biggest challenge in quantum computing from my understanding.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. So I guess when we talk about quantum computers, they use a different fundamental building block. So in regular computers, we use these things called a bit. So a bit can be a 0 or a 1.
Or
right?
on and off in some kind of a gate, like a transistor.
Right.
Which is either on, it has charge, or it doesn't have charge, it's off.
So to make it even simpler, imagine I was trying to build a thing. Let's say I was trying to communicate with you, and the only thing I had was a flashlight, right? So I could store essentially 2 pieces of information with one flashlight. I could say, all right, the flashlight is on and the flashlight is off. So I could use that to represent anything I want, right? I could say, all right, I could, make an arrangement with Shashank here, and I could say, hey, like when the flashlight is on, that means the number 1, and then when the flashlight is off, that means the number is 0, right? So I could, keep on turning the flashlight on and off at certain time intervals, and then I could communicate all sorts of interesting things, right? And I could communicate even more information with the same flashlight if I had, maybe 2 of the same flashlights, right? So I could have not just 2 pieces of information, but I would actually have double the information, right? I would have like, I guess 4 pieces of information, right? So I'd have like, and then if I had 3 flashlights, I would have, not 2 pieces of information, but I would actually have 8 pieces of information, right? Because it kind of scales to the power of 2, right? So, and then if I had, 1,000,000 flashlights, I could have a lot more information.
2 to the million, which is a massive, massive number.
Big number, right? So now I guess the thing is with one flashlight, I would only have 2 pieces of information. But I guess my understanding is that with a qubit, you can have not just 2 pieces of information in one qubit, but you could have theoretically, my understanding is you could have infinite piece information. So I guess a qubit has a off state and has an on state, or it could have a superposition between the off and the on. So it could be, I guess in theory, you could represent any number because it could be like partially on or partially off. So I guess the way I kind of imagine this, and this is probably like a horrible way of imagining this, but I sort of imagine it as like turning my flashlight to become dimmer or brighter, right? So let's say like off would be like completely dim, and then like on might be like 100% brightness, but then like I could have, imagine like the dimmer switch where I have like, 20% brightness, like 60% brightness, 50% brightness. So if I had some sort of a way of measuring how bright the flashlight is, like I could have one flashlight that could technically represent any type of number, right? So
Just to chime in a little bit, I don't know if that's entirely true. I don't know if it's like on, off, and everything in between, like a real number probability distribution. I think it's just on, off, or both. Kind of like Schrodinger's cat. It's either in the box and alive, not alive, or it's both.
yeah, I don't think so. So I looked into this, and my understanding is that it could be infinite.
Huh.
Although only,
Theoretically.
infinite in terms of theoretically, right? So going back to my flashlight example, right? You can maybe have some sort of sensor that could measure how bright the flashlight is, right? But you can't measure that with infinite precision, right?
That's fair.
So you could say like, all right, this is like 50% brightness. Or you can maybe say like 50.5% brightness, but I can't say like 50.01279% brightness. At some point, like
Maybe like bucket it into 25, 50, 75, 100, and maybe a few levels in between, but there might be a limit, you're saying.
yeah, something like that. So my understanding is that that is one of the fundamental problems that quantum computers have is since these qubits are, I guess can, in theory, represent any number. In practice, they can't actually measure the actual like qubit with 100% precision. So that's why there's the concept of a physical qubit and then a logical qubit. So I guess a physical qubit would be like in our example, like the flashlight, to say, all right, the flashlight can technically be bright or not bright, and then represent some sort of number on the number line, but then...
And this would be the actual subatomic particle.
Right, exactly.
What is it? The Majorana particle. Majorana fermion.
Something like that. Yeah.
As opposed to a logical?
Yeah, so the logical qubit would be, I guess, like in program, like when you actually program with these things, you need to, like, I guess in the program, maybe you'd say like, all right, we can have infinite precision, or maybe, you know, some sort of precision, because you can't hit infinite, but like, so I guess there's in theory, we have like infinite precision. In practice, we have some level of precision, but then you might need like multiple qubits to actually give you that logical qubit that you wanted. So I don't know exactly what it is, but it might be like a power of 10 or not a power of 10, but like you might be off by like an order of magnitude. So like potentially if you had maybe 10 physical qubits, maybe you would have like actual one logical qubit, something like that. And I'm sure somebody who knows more about quantum computers will probably correct me on this, but that's my understanding, is you can only have there is a lot of error correcting, and there's a lot of noise in dealing with these qubits in the quantum computers, so that you can't actually get the full kind of like spectrum of how do I put this? Like, you can't get the full reliability, and you can't get all the numbers, but you can only bucket it into something, as you said before. So when Microsoft came out with this thing, they said that it could have 8 qubits. Now, I'm not sure if that's 8 physical qubits or if that's 8 logical qubits, but regardless, there's 8 qubits, which
I would assume it's a logical qubit, because like 8 qubits is way too little.
Maybe. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe logical, physical, but regardless, 8 qubits is still pretty tiny. So it can't really do a whole lot yet. Now, for reference, I was doing a little bit of research to see, like, all right, if we had scale and we had a higher number of qubits, what types of things would happen? So now, from my really brief research, there is an algorithm out there called Shor's algorithm, which is used to factor prime numbers, which might be able, which would be really interesting for breaking encryption. So there are some mathematical things. It's not really that important to get into it, but
to set the stage, there's a lot of fear that quantum computing will break all of the encryption in all of the software that we have today, which would severely compromise, you know, every single password for financial institutions, for every single bank, for you know, your personal documents, for military purposes. So this is like a very serious issue that a lot of companies are taking seriously.
Yes. So where you thought that it was just you and the bank that had access to this information, I mean, if quantum computers are able to break this, then all bets are off, and all information which you thought was encrypted and actually used to be encrypted is now essentially going to be public to somebody who has one of these computers.
And it seems like it's not if quantum computers can break it, it's about when they can break it.
Yes. So I was reading it, and it seems like you would need around 1,500 to 5,000 logical qubits to break encryption. So assuming Microsoft has 8, it still seems like we're a bit a ways away from getting 5,000 actual logical qubits and not physical qubits. So that might mean that you might need, I don't know, 100,000 physical qubits. So, but if they say they can scale to 1 million, maybe that takes 10 years, but that might mean in 10 years that all the encryption is broken. But I think we're still safe for now. but you never know.
How many did you say we need?
1,500 to maybe 5,000 logical qubits to break encryption.
Yeah, that's anywhere between 7 to 10 years away if we go with like Moore's law, power doubles every 2 years.
Yeah, so I guess that's kind of soon, actually.
Which is similar to, or maybe it's a little more conservative than Microsoft's estimate, and also Google, which both companies think that they're going to reach on the order of 1 million qubits by 2030-ish.
Yeah, I mean, that's only in 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that if these big companies are claiming 5 years, I would tend to believe them.
Again, this is not a mature consumer electronic field. This is cutting edge of physics. So I'm kind of skeptical, but if they do come up with this technology, it is going to be groundbreaking. So one obvious issue is cybersecurity and breaking encryption, like we talked about. And it's not just that when we get a capable quantum computer, they'll be able to break this encryption. People are harvesting encrypted data today in the hopes that one day they might be able to decrypt this encrypted file and uncover all the secrets. So if you think about like some company like Coinbase, which has encrypted secret keys for who knows how many customers with billions, maybe trillions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency, if you somehow got a hold of all of Coinbase's encrypted data, even though it's useless today, one day you might be able to unencrypt it and get all this cryptocurrency, which would be insane.
That's true. And actually, a lot of these exchanges tend to put most of their crypto in just one wallet or something. Yeah. So all you need to do is just say like, all right, let's put our computers on this one, or even something like Satoshi Nakamoto's keys, right? And then you'd have access to hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin almost immediately. So yeah.
So a lot of companies have been spending time to develop quantum computing safe encryption keys, which are even more secure than Shor's algorithm, the whatever encryption keys that we use today.
We don't use Shor's algorithm to be clear. So typically for Shor's algorithm is a quantum computing algorithm that would be used to break encryption. So typically what people do for encryption is they use this. There's typically a couple of different encryption algorithms that people. Yeah, I didn't want to get into this, but we'll get into this real quick.
A little bit.
So SHA-256 is a hashing algorithm. It's not an encryption algorithm. So
encryption is RSA.
RSA is an old encryption algorithm. Most people don't use RSA anymore, but Shor's algorithm would break RSA. So most people use ECDSA, which is elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman something.
Oh, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yes. Encryption. But let me briefly explain them. So when people talk about SHA hashing or just hashing in general, it's a one-way mathematical function. So what that means is I can take in some text and then I'm gonna make a hash of it. So basically, I'm gonna take in something, and then it's basically gonna be like bleh, bleh. This is the output, right? But what's interesting is when I have the hash, if I change even one tiny little bit of the output, the entire hash will be different.
Significantly different.
So let's say I had the entire Harry Potter series, right? And I put, all 7 books into a hash. Then what's going to happen is I'm, whatever that is, like, 5,000 pages of text. I'm going to go put that in, and then I'm going to put that into a hashing function, and then that's going to give me a random string, which is, I think, like 32 characters long. And then if I change just a single word in that book, right? Like I change something on page 1000, and I change a the to an the entire hash will be different. So what is useful about hashes is I can prove that something has never changed, right? So if I say like, hey, this is the hash of my Harry Potter book, And then what you could do is you could run the entire Harry Potter book through the same hash, and you can make sure that the hash is the exact same as what I told you it was, or what you originally computed. So then I would know that the data has never been altered or tampered with.
And it gives you a unique identifier for any kind of arbitrary piece of data, whether it's like a 500-page book, a single name, a picture, an audio file, whatever it may be.
Exactly. So hashes are used to make sure that data is never tampered with. But with that being said, hashes are one way, so I can't undo that information. Now,
Hashes will be one way of using passwords for authentication on a website. So if you used a password on my website, I could just store a hash of your password and not actually store the password myself. And that way, every time you want to log in, you enter the password, I will compare it to the hash that I already have and make sure it's the same one that you entered when you first created the account. So that would be a way of storing passwords without me actually storing the password and just having the hash.
yes. Now, I want to warn the listeners here that whenever you're using hashes, be careful. So doing what Shashank just described would actually be, quote, insecure, because there are things out there called rainbow tables where people will just pre-compute like millions of hashes. So what they'll do is they'll just say like, all right, let's imagine we were able to hack Shashank's database and we had the hash of all the passwords. Well, what I could do is I could just match the password to one of the pre-computed hashes. So then in just a couple of minutes, maybe I could be able to break into your account. So what people will do is they will typically store the password plus some random arbitrary piece of data, and they'll store the hash of that. So Shashank would know what the arbitrary piece of data is, but you wouldn't then, if you had like the password plus arbitrary data and you hash that, it's going to give you something completely different. So then that would make it so the rainbow tables wouldn't be able to just figure out what the actual password was. So that arbitrary piece of data in computer science is called a salt. So anyways,
remember, salt your hashes.
yes, salt your hashes. Exactly. Don't just salt your pasta, but salt your hashes. Exactly. Anyways, but then when you have encryption, encryption is typically something that is not one way, but it's two ways. So you would encrypt and then you should be able to decrypt as well. Because if you can't decrypt it, it's worthless, right? So with a hash, you would never be able to decrypt it, right? So RSA is one technique in order to encrypt and decrypt numbers, or encrypt and decrypt things, and that is taking advantage of the fact that factoring prime numbers is really, really hard for computers. But then there is another type of more popular hashing, which is what Bitcoin uses, and a lot of the best things use. It's actually the ECDSA hashing, or sorry, not hashing, but encryption algorithm. And that's has to also do with multiplying numbers, but it's actually multiplying two numbers on an elliptic curve. So you don't have to understand what any of this means. It's just like a little bit of a tangent, but yeah. Basically, the key takeaway here is that there are algorithms that are theorized that would be really, really good at decrypting these types of encryption algorithms, right? And quantum computers would be able to do that. And as Shashank mentioned, there are quantum resistant algorithms that would be really hard for quantum computers to break, but it is a risk. But I think that we're a little bit negative on quantum computers.
Let's talk about the positives.
Yes.
We talked about a lot of the drawbacks, but I mean, quantum computing, there's a reason why multiple big name companies, Microsoft, Google, and also IBM has been working on quantum computing for a long time, because this is a fundamental technology that could be a potential breakthrough and enable so many cool use cases. So I guess the way I think about it is, if you compare a CPU and a GPU, most of the progress with LLMs in the last few years has been because of GPUs and because of how great they are at parallel processing, because that's what LLMs kind of need. They take these large matrices of numbers and do computation on them to give you the output. So fancy math with large matrices at large scale parallelly. doing a lot of multiplications in parallel of a lot of numbers at the same time, as opposed to CPUs, which were more suited to doing really complex calculations sequentially, one after the other. Do this really complex calculation and then do another complex calculation right after that. And this GPU came along, enabled this new kind of technology, and then boom, we have really fast LLMs. But I think the promise of quantum computing is that it can be like an even order of magnitude better than GPUs at enabling new kinds of technology. So it's not necessarily better at the same thing, but it's different. And the hope is it will enable new kinds of applications that we haven't seen before.
Yes. So my understanding is that quantum computers are going to be really, really good at simulating quantum mechanics. So why is that useful, right? Well, I mean, the world is made up of atoms or things that are smaller than atoms, right? So if you could simulate that, you could essentially simulate the entire world, right? So you could use that for maybe doing drug development, right? You could use that for maybe doing material science. You could use that to simulate the brain. You could use that to simulate the body. Any physical systems, I think, would be really good with quantum computers. So that is useful. So in previous episodes of this podcast, we were talking about some of the fundamental limits of AI, right? And one of the problems is if I am trying to get data on certain things, let's say I am getting data on my garden, right? It's like, well, it's really hard to train an AI model on gardening, right? Because sure, you can train the AI on what humans have done, and that's essentially knowledge that has been passed down from time. But if I want to get the raw information, it's like, all right, I plant a redwood. It's like, well, it takes a super long time to grow, right? So it's like a lot of these redwood trees have been around longer than all the humans, right? So I mean, there are some redwood trees that are thousands of years old. So if it's not realistic for a AI to like some AI robot to plant a tree and then figure out the best way to grow the redwood, because it would take 1,000 years. So that's longer than all our lifetimes, right? Well, I mean, for now, I mean, maybe at some point we'll be living thousands of years with this technology, but right now that's a really long time to wait. But if I could simulate with a quantum computer growing a redwood tree, and then the AI robots would be potentially really, really good at figuring out the absolute ideal growing conditions for the redwoods, not just using what the humans are already done before. So I think that if you wanted to create some sort of superhuman gardener, it's not sufficient to just plant a seed of a redwood tree. I think that it would be probably pretty useful to simulate out all of the different atoms or whatever in like a seed, and then try to do a bunch of environmental simulations of like simulate more water, more nutrients, less nutrients, more sunlight, less sunlight, and all these different combinations. I think quantum computers would be really, really good at that. And then what you could do is you could simulate that and then use that to train an AI model. Going back to Grok 3, right? Like you could use something like that to train your Grok 7 or your ChatGPT 6, right? And you could use that information that you gleaned from a quantum computer in order to make superhuman gardening, superhuman drug research, superhuman material science, superhuman. I mean, you could even make superhuman quantum computers, right? And the fact that you're able to simulate these things is going to allow that. So I think you could almost say that the killer use case of quantum computers will be simulating quantum computers and quantum mechanics.
I think your explanation kind of intuitively makes sense, but I still have no idea what these computers are good at. So to kind of give you a concrete example, and this is not something Microsoft did, going back to maybe like a couple weeks ago when Google released its Willow chip, which is also a quantum computing chip with a slightly different approach. they gave us a concrete example of what this chip is better at than traditional classical computers. And they took this popular benchmark, which is used to check if quantum computers are actually doing something better than classical computers. And this was the random circuit sampling benchmark. I'm not entirely sure what it is or what it does, but this quantum computer from Google solved in under 5 minutes what it would take classical supercomputers 10 to the 25 years. That is like 10 septillion years. And this is not a regular chip. This is the world's fastest computer would take 10 to the 25 years to solve this thing that Google's Willow chip solved in under 5 minutes. So it just enables a whole different kind of computation. I'm assuming it uses some kind of probabilistic input-output because the benchmark is called random circuit sampling. And traditional computers are very sequential. They don't use random inputs or outputs. If they do, they kind of collapse that and like abstract that and convert that into sequential input output into tangible numbers. But this thing can work with probabilities, which, I think could even be well suited to running LLMs, because that's what LLMs are. They're probability distributions over the next word and the next sequence of tokens. So if we could build a quantum computer that can run an LLM natively and have this kind of performance, which is like orders and or like 10 to the 25 orders of magnitude better than classical computers, that would be like insanity.
Yeah, or maybe what it'll be is it won't be a quantum computer that's running an LLM, right? Because the LLMs deal with just language, but you might use a similar architecture that is using LLMs, but to simulate the world, right?
Yeah.
I think that is something that we would potentially
World simulation, right?
Yeah. And then I think both of these things will kind of work symbiotically together, right? I think you'll still have classical computers, but then these different computing paradigms like quantum computers will be able to train and learn from each other. And then that is how we're going to get super intelligence. And then,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to change the topic and then
I was going to do the same thing. Yeah.
Right.
What else can this enable? We have like these super amazing technologies, and the only thing missing, we've been talking about the virtual world. Let's bring this into the real world, like the physical world.
Yes. So the physical world. So there's this company based out of Sunnyvale, which is where Shashank lives and where we're recording this episode right now, called Figure AI. Now, they're one of many of the humanoid robot companies. So they just had an announcement, which is really cool, that they called Helix. So Helix is what they deem a vision language action model for generalist humanoid control. In other words, it's a model that is used to control robots and allow the robots to work with each other. So there's a bunch of stuff, but we'll skip that for now and talk about the video that they came out with. So they showed a video of two robots that are able to put away groceries. Now, the video is a little bit hilarious because it sort of looks like drunk robots just try to put away the groceries. So like imagine you did a little bit too many drugs or whatever your intoxicant of choice is, and are trying to put away the groceries with your best buddy. That's what these robots look like. They're
just really slow. They're picking up the remote and slowly taking it and then handing it off to the next robot.
Yeah, and then they're like going and they're like, oh, let me put the ketchup in the refrigerator. Oh, is this the ketchup? I don't want to drop it. It's like, oh, is this the ketchup? I don't know. Let me put it here. And it's just looking like two stoners who are just trying to like put away the groceries.
Now, if these robots are watching this in the future, I'm really impressed by your capability. And I'm sure this is just starting point.
Yes. No shade on the robots. I mean, it's incredibly impressive.
Remarkable.
It is quite remarkable indeed. And the fact that they're able to put away the groceries at all is actually hugely impressive. And I think that let's imagine that this technology gets general purpose enough where we're able to have these robots in our houses. I think that even if it took a robot 5 times as long as a human to put away the groceries, I think that a lot of people would still buy those robots because they'd be like time that they wouldn't have to do it, right? So it's like if I say, hey, robot, go fold my clothes and then go put away the laundry, even if it took 3 hours, I think a lot of people would be okay waiting because like you could go to work and by the time you come back, your laundry is folded, your windows are washed, and all your food is put away, and a nice meal is made for you. And even if it took the entire day for the robot to do it, that's okay because you didn't have to do it, and that's one less thing for you to worry about when you get home.
It's kind of funny because if you think about before this LLM era, if you go back 5, 10 years ago and you think about robotics, I think robotics has always been this superhuman, extremely efficient, extremely fast, very precise mechanism to automate large-scale manufacturing usually. You have these very specialized robots that do one job ridiculously well at like superhuman speeds. Like that's the whole reason why people got replaced by robots in assembly lines, because they could do that one task really, really well. But then that robots probably costs like hundreds of thousands of dollars and maybe like millions overall to set everything up, to maintain it, have people configure it to your specific use case. As opposed to this new era of robotics, which is a general purpose robot, which can do just about anything you throw at it. And it doesn't actually have to be trained for something specific. It doesn't have to be set up, configured. You just like hold the robot's hand, drag it along with you and say, hey, do that thing that I want you to do. And then boom, it just does it. I think there's a significant leap from having traditional robotics doing one specific thing on a factory line to a humanoid robot just doing everything that a human can do.
Yes, exactly. And the way
It kind of reminds me of VoIP, like voice over IP, when the internet was still early and we were making calls on the internet. It was really bad compared to traditional phone lines, which are, have existed since, the telephone was invented. And that was fantastic. But then we switched to calling over the internet, which is kind of cool, but it was a lot worse. So I feel like this is where we are in this evolution of robotics. It's a lot worse at most things than traditional robotics, which was specialized for one specific use case. But the hope is this can enable virtually any kind of task that a human can do.
Yes, and I think that human is very important here because the world is made for humans, right? A lot of these specific robots that are maybe used for factories, it works really well if you design the factory around the robots to do the particular task, right? But the rest of the world is designed for humans, right? Like you don't want to have to redesign your entire house to have a robot that can cook for you, right? You want the robot to work well within the house that is already there, right? So it's like things are human height, right? If I want to, put away the groceries, like I need to have some sort of way to open the refrigerator to navigate around the house. If I want to clean the windows, I need to move around the house, clean the windows, and I don't want to have like some sort of specialized robot that just like cleans my windows and cooks my food and tidies up the clutter around the house, right? Like, but a human form is really good for that because the world is made for humans essentially because we created the world. So that's why a humanoid robot is important. And also, there are not in all parts of the world, but in lots of the world, a lot of the developed world, there's a lot of labor shortages, right? So in Japan, for example, they have a huge worker shortage, right? And they have a massive aging population, and having a robot to help the elderly population in and around the house, at restaurants, delivering the food, is going to be really valuable as the world just kind of gets older. And we all need a little bit more help. So this is going to allow us to free up our time to focus on some of the more fun things in life. Anyways,
Yeah, so do you know what is so exciting about this current announcement? Because I remember they introduced a couple different robots over the years, and they've been working with OpenAI for a while, but it seems like they kind of severed that partnership, and they've been working on their own proprietary model. Whereas before, I think they were using OpenAI's GPT series of models, but now they're building their own. I assume it's like on device too, because unlike the GPT massive trillion something parameter models, these ones are like a couple billion, and another one, they use like multiple models. Another one is like 80 million parameters. So tiny.
Yeah. So getting back onto the architecture of how this was built, right? So on the Figure AI's Helix page, they explain that there's actually not one, but two AI models that are running at the same time. So they say there's a fast model and then a slow model. So kind of know like the thinking fast and thinking slow.
Yeah.
We've talked about that before, but
Daniel Kahneman, amazing psychologist, researcher who studies the human psychology and talks a lot about the fast and slow part of our brain, where we have one part that is instinctual, is reactive to make sure we don't die. Like when you touch a hot flame, you instantly recoil and move your hand away. That's like your body's self-preservation mechanism. And the other one is like thinking slow part of your brain, where you're making evaluations about, okay, whether or not I should quit my job right now, what I should study for grad school, and making complex decisions.
Yeah, exactly. So the Figure team has essentially done that in these robots. So they have, I guess, two GPUs that are running in the robot, and then one runs a really small, what they call their System 1 model, which is for their fast reactive control.
Which is running like 20 times a second.
Yeah, super fast. And that is a really tiny AI model. So that is an 80 million parameter transformer. So for reference, I think DeepSeek was like 640 something billion parameters. And this is 80 million. So it's way, way, way smaller. And even some of like the absolute smallest models would run on your laptop might be like at least a billion or 2 billion parameters.
Yeah.
Right. So
my MacBook M1 can run like 8 billion parameter model comfortably, and 13 billion parameter models, it'll not spit out the entire output at once, but it'll give me like line by line every second.
Right. So 80 million's tiny, tiny, tiny.
Tiny.
And then they have another GPU for their System 2 thinking, which is able to process vision and do some language reasoning. So they call that their System 2 thinking. So to recap, their System 1, super fast. Their System 2 is the one where you think about it for a while.
And even that is pretty fast, like 6 to 9 times a second, right?
Yes, 7 to 9 times a second.
Yeah.
But I think in order to work with the real world, you need to process things fairly quickly, right? And although this might be faster than me, it's faster than most humans probably.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, 7 to 9 times per second is pretty darn fast. I mean, I think, like, you ever seen those like F1 drivers who are doing the things where they try to
That's pretty fast.
hit the buttons really quickly? Like maybe they are 7 to 9 times per second, but I could
not their slow thinking processes. That's well, I guess that is kind of slow, isn't it?
7 to 9 times.
I don't know if that's like, I don't know which part of their brain they're using, the fast part or the slow part, because it is kind of reactionary, but also not.
I would imagine they're fast. It's probably muscle memory, right? Because
maybe, yeah,
you can't be thinking about how fast you can hit the button, right? You gotta just like have that. You gotta train for that, and then it's got to become automatic.
I see, yeah.
I think, right? Because I think kind of my intuition around these things is when it comes to your like whenever you're learning something new, right? You're really slow because you're thinking really hard about it, right? So it's like if you ever learn a new language or you're trying to learn a new instrument or any new skill, right? Like you're gonna be bad at it and you're also really slow because you're thinking about it, right?
So the F1 reaction times is about 3 to 5 times a second. That's how fast they can move.
Okay, so this is their
double almost.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, like 7 to 9s, almost double.
The figure AI's slow system thinking is double the fast thinking of F1 drivers.
Yeah, but
But they still move like a bunch of stoners. Like,
right. So, I don't know, and it's hard to read too much into that, but maybe on their V2 model, it'll be not moving like a bunch of stoners, but moving like F1 drivers.
I laugh now, but the nature of exponential growth, they might just take all physical jobs in the next 5 years. Who knows?
I mean, I don't think so. And I think that it won't take
5 years?
I think it'll be longer than that. And I think not because the technology might be there, but I think that we could use self-driving cars as an example. And I would argue that we kind of have self-driving cars right now, but due to lots of reasons, self-driving cars aren't on the road everywhere. And I think a lot of that is because humans don't want them to be everywhere, right? Because you have essentially, I think when it comes to the self-driving cars, it's kind of like what company has the biggest balls to say like, hey, we're able to take the liability that if something goes wrong, like we're willing to be sued. And I think that
That's definitely Elon.
maybe, right? But the only self-driving car that I've actually been in right now is Google's Waymo, right? And they have it
You've ridden in a Tesla for a while, yeah.
Well, that was scary. I would not call. I mean, sure, it's full self-driving, but it's a very bad driver, and I would like. I would trust my own driving way more than I would trust the Tesla full self-driving.
We need a controlled study where you have both cars drive the same route and then compare it, because I'm assuming the Tesla is driving in a different spot than Waymo.
Well, yeah, and Waymo
under different conditions too.
I think is being very smart about it because they're geofencing in and they've driven all these roads and they are really confident that they know how to handle all the hard parts of these roads. And I think they even have a human backup just in case. So I would say that self-driving is here, just not everywhere yet.
Well, it's not right here, it's there in SF, but metaphorically, it is possible in some areas. It's just not possible to scale everywhere. And yeah, you gave a good example. I think Waymo and Tesla are probably at the forefront of self-driving, but in very different approaches. I was just hanging out with one of my friends who works at Waymo, doing ML there, and he talked about how Waymo has a lot of different kinds of models for each specific use case, for figuring out where the lines are, the road lane dividers, or figuring out what when it sees stop signs or when it has to interact with pedestrians. As opposed to Tesla, I think they used to have a similar approach where they had these different modules which are all handling different parts of computer vision, but they recently, I think last year or so, switched to the transformer architecture after transformers proved so amazing for language and next token prediction. They were like, let's just use transformers for the entire computer vision stack. And they built their computer vision transformer stack. And it, again, similar to all the things that we talked about, it was worse before it got much better than the previous solution. And it's a little different. Tesla is supposed to work everywhere, and Waymo is geofenced. And I do agree with you. I think the Waymo is a lot better. And you mentioned there's a couple different issues stopping self-driving. When we asked a lot of these people, when are we going to have self-driving? This was 10 years ago. They're always like, oh, it's going to be 5 years away. And you ask people, when is self-driving going to be here? They're always like, okay, it's going to take another 5 years, because I think it's hard to solve self-driving 100%, because it's like very error prone. It's interacting with the real world, with other people who can cause accidents, and there can be like mechanical failures. There can be like a lot of other weather patterns that happen that can obscure your vision. So getting the last few nines, like 99.99999, as many nines as you need to scale up to the entire world and not have an exorbitant amount of accidents is really hard to do.
Yeah, for sure. And 5 nines might not even be enough. I mean, you might need like
what do we
10
need?
nines, because I think there is some like calculators out there that says like, okay, even if you have like 99.9999% error rates, you're still down for like, 20 seconds a year or something like that, or 20 minutes a year, whatever it is, right? So if you're wrong, like for 20 minutes out of the year, I mean, you don't want to have 20 minutes of accidents per year, right?
So this one Google search says we need nearly 6 nines. So that is 99.999999%. Or sorry, my bad. 99.9999 percent reliability to be better than human drivers, because we are a little worse than that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a lot of nines.
It's a lot of nines.
Yeah. And I think that until we get to that point, I think honestly, we might need even like one more nine for I think people to feel like, all right, these robots are way better than me, right? Because even if it's just matching human drivers, right? I think a lot of people say like, well, I mean, I've never been in an accident. Like, I'll be fine.
Yeah, like the average driver may not be the best example of a driver. I think you want a good driver.
A great driver.
A great driver.
Right? Like, I may not trust one of these self-driving cars unless I know it's like way better than me. Because like I know if I drive, like I probably won't be getting in an accident. Like knock on wood, knock on something. I have never been in an accident. I've been lucky, and I just never have been in like
in a major accident.
Well, all right, fine. So I'm all right. So there was this one time when I first met Shashank that we were snowboarding, and I happened to take one of our friend's car, and I said, "Look, don't worry, I've never been in an accident."
And I trusted him because I, on the other hand, have been in a couple different accidents, and I was like, you know what? You seem like a very trustworthy guy and very careful, very meticulous. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure you'll be a better careful driver than me.
Yes. So then
1 minute into Mark driving.
It was less than 1 minute. So 1 minute into probably like 20 seconds into having this car. And for reference, we were snowboarding. It was Tahoe. It was night. The backup camera was dirty. I couldn't see. And there was this black like a pickup truck behind us.
The real world is very messy.
Yeah, it was black, and I couldn't see the car, and I backed into this car that was parked there. The pickup truck had one of those like metal bumpers, a silver bumper, and it didn't leave a scratch on it. Yet the rental car that my buddy had like it got this like little crack.
It was really tiny.
It was
really minor.
It was a really minor bump or like crack in the bumper. And then I started freaking out about it. So I was like, okay, how can we fix this little crack in the bumper? So then first thing Shashank and I did, because I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad. I just went and I told him that I was not gonna damage his car. So then we're like, all right, let's go. And then I went to AutoZone, and then we were like, hey, can we match his paint color? And then they didn't have the color. So then it's like, okay, and then actually after that point, I withdrew like a bunch of cash. I was like, from the ATM, I think it was like $1,000 cash that I withdrew. It's like, all right,
for a tiny scratch.
I was like, I feel so bad. I feel so bad that I broke your car. But I was like, I'm gonna fix it. So then we went to Walmart, and then I was like, okay, maybe we should just get some, well, at first we were like, okay, maybe transparent nail polish that could kind of clean it up. But I was like, no, that's not enough. That we tried to match the paint color, so that we were in Walmart in the nail polish aisle, like looking for different colors. And then we got like all these different nail polish colors, and then are in the light of the Walmart parking lot at night.
Late at night. Yeah.
Yeah, late at night, just mixing nail polishes, trying to match the color, to try to fix this crack. And then, I'm going to paint it, like, yeah, this looks okay, this looks all right. And then
It did not next morning.
Yeah,
In broad daylight.
In the broad daylight, it looked horrible.
It did not. Okay.
But I guess the rental company didn't say anything.
It was so minor. I don't even think they noticed.
So it made it look like it was an old damage. And then I remember that I think I gave the money to our friend. He's like, oh, I don't want all this money. And then he's like, Shashank, you hold on to it. So then Shashank,
I was escrow service.
yeah. So then I gave the money to Shashank, and then Shashank put the money in his bank account later, and then Shashank then used Google Pay to send me back the $1,000, and then so basically we both ended up with the same amount of money
minus some transaction fees.
Yeah,
ATM withdrawal fees.
Yeah, and then whatever like the payment fees was, and then we still have like a broken bumper, but it was a rental, so.
I would hope a self-driving car would have enough sensors that it would be able to detect a car behind it when backing up at like 5 miles an hour.
Yeah. So anyways, that one time, and I felt really bad about it. But yeah, that was one of the first times Shashank and I were actually hanging out. So it was a good bonding experience. We actually had plans to go to a casino, and we actually never ended up going to casino together.
Never gone to a casino.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think we do well, but maybe.
Yeah.
We were there. We're like, we're gonna count cards. We're gonna do really well at this casino. I think we were we were trying to like teach ourselves how to count cards beforehand, and no, we ended up just spending that whole night just mixing nail polishes together in the parking lot.
I think financially it was probably a better decision than hitting the casinos that night.
That's probably true. Yeah. It was still fun, but better story than just winning a little bit of money at casino, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, so these robots are really cool. And I think that they're coming soon. Right?
I think so. Like just like you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we are pushing this field, like the global, the royal we, all these companies are pushing this field forward from multiple angles, from building better, bigger, state-of-the-art LLM models, robotics companies building more proficient humanoid robots that can carry out actions, interact with each other. So another thing, I don't know if we dove deep into this, but this is one of the first use cases of multiple robots interacting with each other, with like a single model, as opposed to like the Waymo approach of using multiple different models for special use cases. They have just a single model that handles everything from picking up objects to locating things in space to navigating to interacting with other robots to do collaborative tasks. So I think like this is a promising new approach, new step forward, and hopefully other robotics companies adopt similar approaches. And a couple of years down the line, we have a cheap Chinese manufacturer able to produce a tiny robot that we can have in our homes doing stuff for us day to day. That would be a pretty cool future.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a great place to end it right there. Yeah. So guys, artificial superintelligence is coming, and it's maybe only 5 years away.
Maybe.
Yeah. All right. Catch you in the next one.
Until next time.